Madam President, I rise this morning to talk about the meeting tomorrow the President's called at the White House, a summit I think it's been referred to, one for which I have great hope. I hope it'll be a summit where both sides leave their weapons at the door, sit across the table from one another, and begin talking about a comprehensive solution to a comprehensive problem. The solution to that problem, though, does not lie in creating villains and enemies. And in the last 2 weeks, we've heard a lot of rhetoric coming from the White House demonizing people who have corporate jets or demonizing people who make over $1 million. I was reminded in this debate about millionaires of the debate in 1969 in America. It was one of my first debates that I ever watched. I'd returned home from the service, I'd begun my business, and a report came out in the newspaper that 155 Americans who made over $1 million paid zero taxes. I personally was astounded. Everybody else was astounded. And Congress went to work to close the loophole, and they did it by creating something known as the alternative minimum tax, something to make sure that someone who paid no tax at least paid their fair share, and I put that in quotes. Today, not 155 millionaires are paying the alternative minimum tax, 34,200,000 Americans are. Because oftentimes when Congress goes to target one person, they catch everybody in a bigger loop. I don't think we need to demonize those who employ Americans, those who create the jobs, those who make our economy run, any more than we should villainize people who want to try and save Social Security or Medicare. The President in his 2 speeches last week targeted millionaires, he targeted job creators, he created villains, and he created enemies. None of that will help us to solve a problem. Now, the President's not the only one playing that game. A little bit of criticism can go to both sides. You know, as we look at the chart that's been on the floor for the last 2 weeks about what's happened in the last 30 months since the President was elected with critical things, unemployment's up by 1.9 million people, 17% in terms of the rate. Gas prices are almost double. Federal debt's up 35%. But remember, it was $10 trillion when the President was elected, so it's not just the President's fault, but he is making it worse. Debt per person is now up by $11,258 and health insurance premiums by almost 20%. In fact, the only thing that's down in the last 30 months are the expectations of the American people, expectations of what our future is going to be like. So for a moment, I'd like to offer some historical suggestions as to what both sides can do tomorrow at the White House when they leave the weapons at the door, sit at the table, and really begin to negotiate. One is to look back in history when we've had big problems and we came up with big solutions. The 1980s, a particular time, I was in the state legislature then, followed what was happening in Washington. In fact, when I was 39 years old in 1983, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill had a meeting at the White House. Allegedly, I wasn't there, but allegedly it went something like this. The President said, well, Social Security's going broke in about 20 years. We just got that report. We need to fix it. O'Neill said, I agree. The President said, I'm willing to work on it, but I'm not willing to raise the tax. And O'Neill said, well, I'm willing to work on it, but I don't want to cut the benefit. And they looked at the actuary and said, what do we do? And the actuary said, well, you push the eligibility out, and you get the system back in actuarial soundness. I was 39 in 1983. I would have been collected Social Security at the age of 65 in 2010. But because Reagan and O'Neill got together, they pushed my eligibility out by 1 year to age 66, not age 65. And now incrementally it goes up 2 months a year to age 67 in a few years. That put the system in actuarial soundness for 67 years. The reason it is now all of a sudden in trouble again is the protracted economy and these difficulties have caused people, baby boomers, to go to the bank now of Social Security and collect early Social Security at age 62. So we've had a rush to Social Security because of the unemployment and the uncertainty in our economy. But Reagan and O'Neill fixed Social Security by pushing the eligibility out. They didn't raise the tax, but they did raise the ceiling upon which it was levied. I think it's interesting politically, a note the President should understand and all of us should recognize. The next year was 1984, and President Reagan won 49 of 50 states a year after he fixed Social Security. So I don't think we ought to demonize people for trying to save the bigger problems of our debt and deficit. Everybody in this room knows that you could cut every discretionary dollar out and you still owe $300 billion in the deficit. We're only going to fix Social Security and Medicare, are the only ways we're going to fix the debt and the deficit. And on Medicare, I was disappointed that when Paul Ryan in the House came up with a forthright plan, he was immediately demonized. In fact, he was invited to the White House and criticized face-to-face at a conference the President had. That was just for trying. It's about time all of us started trying. We started to try common ground. We started to look at our solutions in a comprehensive way. It's not time that we stopped calling names and instead we started calling numbers. We started looking at what it is we can do within our control to put our spending back in line, amortize our debt over time to a reasonable amount, and reduce our deficit over time. It's not going to be fixed with one stroke of a pen or one single piece of legislation. But it is going to begin to be fixed when both sides sit down at the table and understand this is the fourth quarter of the major Super Bowl of the future of the United States of America. And continuing to shoot at each other and throw bricks and bats and create victims and create enemies and not talk about the real problems is just making it worse for all of us. It's time we made it better for the American people. I spent the weekend with the American people that live in the state of Georgia celebrating our independence and the 4th of July, and spending some time with 5 of my 9 grandchildren. And I remember Saturday night watching my grandchildren play in the den, looking down at them. They weren't looking at me. I was just watching them play, and I thought about their future. I thought about what their future was going to be like in a country that ran unlimited debt and deficits, that inflated its dollar, lowered its expectations, and was not the America that I'd been fortunate enough to live, work, and be born in. And recognizing my age and my time, I know that my future, the years that I have left, are all about those children and those grandchildren. I want to be a part of a solution for the problem today, but a part of their expectations for the future. I don't want them to look back and say, Granddad made it worse. I want them to look back and say, Granddad made it better. Tomorrow is an opportunity for the President of the United States to lead. He has templates that he can lead with. He can either choose to take isolated enemies and isolated arrows and shoot them at people, or he can instead look back at his deficit commission. His deficit commission, which I voted for, by the way. I was one of the Republicans that voted for the creation of the deficit commission. They came back with a comprehensive recommendation in December that should have come to the floor for debate. It dealt with Social Security. It didn't deal with Medicare. It dealt with the tax code. It dealt with spending. It dealt with expenditures. It lowered tax rates and raised opportunity. The President didn't even let it come to the floor of the Congress of the United States. He didn't. He looked the other way. It's time we look straight in each other's eye and say there are solutions out there that good people of goodwill can find a way to do, just like Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did. But I don't want to be a part of just making it worse. I want to be a part of just making it better. And I hope those at the conference tomorrow sit down with that type of attitude. We don't create enemies and villains. We don't make it worse. But we begin a platform and a template where in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we can begin to amortize our debt over time, reduce our deficit over time, raise the expectations of the American people, and cause a brighter future for our children and for our grandchildren. And I yield the floor.